Hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrea and I'm your bookworm. And today we are back to book reviews. We're continuing a series that we've started here on the channel. It's been a while, yes, but we are reviewing Stone of Farewell by Ted Williams. All right, so Stone of Farewell is the second book of a series, a trilogy called Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, written by Ted Williams. I have read the first book, which is called The Dragonbone Chair. You can check out the review here on the channel through the thumbnails or the cards up above. And what can we say about this book? Well, it is an epic fantasy. It was written in 1990, so an oldie, and I will speak about that in the review. On Goodreads, this book has over 53,000 ratings and an average score of 4.1 out of 5. It sits right in the middle of the average for fantasy books, so that says that no one thinks it's too bad or too good. I mean, a lot of people would think that, but the average sits kind of in that 4.1. Anyways, this book, when it was published, was nominated for a Locus Award. Unfortunately, it did not win, but we all know that being nominated is already a pretty good achievement, so getting nominated for this was its achievement of the time, especially for a second book, which not many second books get nominated for awards, but this one was. And alright, so before we jump into the actual review, there's just two housekeeping items. Let's get on with them. The first one is the synopsis. I'm going to narrate the synopsis to you, just so you get a sense of what this book is about. Now, this is the synopsis of the second book, so there might be some spoilers of the first book. If you don't want to hear anything, just skip to the next timestamp and we'll start the review there. Otherwise, you can get to hear what I want to say about this book in terms of synopsis and figure out if it's a book for you or not. So let's go. It is a time of darkness, dread, and ultimate testing for the realm of Ostenard. For the wild magic and terrifying minions of the undead Sivi ruler, Inaluki, the Storm King, are spreading their seemingly undefeatable evil across the kingdom. With the very land blighted by the power of Inaluki's wrath, the tattered remains of a once proud human army flee in search of a last sanctuary and rallying point, the Stone of Farewell, a place shrouded in mystery and ancient sorrow. And even as Prince Joshua seeks to rally his scattered forces, Simon and the surviving members of the League of the Scroll are desperately struggling to discover the truth behind an almost forgotten legend, which will take them from the fallen citadels of humans to the secret heartland of the city, where near immortals must at last decide whether to ally with the race of men in a final war against those of their own blood. Alright, with the synopsis out of the way, let's just go into the second housekeeping item, which is looking at the scores of the first book, The Dragonbone Chair, just so we get a sense of where I sit in terms of this series so far. But as you can see, by the scores I gave to the first book, we're not sitting in a very good place, because this is probably the lowest score I gave this year, and for a long time. It got a 3 out of 5, which again, in itself is not a bad score. It's still positive. However, when we look at this, we look at a 3 and think, oh my god, it must be horrible. And it's not. It's okay. I think it has suffered a bit because of when it was written, some plot, characters, writing style that doesn't really agree with what I enjoy reading it. However, it still had a lot of positives. Of course, my enjoyment wasn't great, so I was a bit hesitant about when to read the second book, but finally I got the courage and decided to read it, and here we are with the review. So let's get on and start with plot. Alright, regarding our plot, we follow the same characters that we followed in the first book, and we start the story pretty much right after the finishing of the first book, which is good because, again, we don't want to miss a lot of detail. I don't like those leaps that books do sometimes, and this way we get to connect with the same characters, deepen that connection, which is really important, and just keep the story going. Now, the story itself, the plot, I wouldn't say it was amazing. I wouldn't say it was super innovative. Maybe for its time it was. I thought it was a bit of, again, that exploration, just characters going from point A to point B to point C, always traveling, which can be a bit boring. It gives a lot of vibes, again, of Dragonlance Chronicles, which is a series I mentioned in the review of the first book, and I still agree that it reminds me a lot of that type of books, which there's nothing wrong with it. Some people really love that style of just having a group and them traveling through lands. I don't really enjoy, or at least I enjoy if it has other plots aside from that. And the question here is, we have 3 main plot lines, but all of them seem to be quite centered on traveling to places. And again, there is this issue with writing or doing this review, which I still haven't been able to fully disentangle the writing style from the plot, which it's normal for you to not be able to because they're all interconnected. But I'm not sure if this book has very slow pacing or if the plot itself is not that complex, not that good in that sense, or a combination of both. I think it's more regarding the writing style, and I'll speak to it in the writing style category. I think the plot has some positives to it. I think, especially for the time, it might have been quite fun to read and quite innovative. But as we read more things in fantasy nowadays, reading these older books might seem that they don't bring anything new. And that's just the fallacy because of us reading more recent things. Because some of these parts were a bit predictable and I could see them coming from a while away. And I mean, again, this might be due to the tropes that were used that have been used so many times throughout fantasy that I've been exposed to them before being exposed in this book, or simply just the author deciding to do that. But anyways, I think I'm going to give this category a 3 out of 5. It's better than the previous one. I think this 3 is a better 3 than the previous one, even though it's not a 3 plus, but it's a 3. So I think you get it. All right, now moving on to characters. Like I said, we follow the exact same characters that we followed in the first book in terms of POVs, which is good because we can connect with them deeper. We can create that connection that in the first book might have been a bit trembling, but now it's getting deeper and we don't get to get used to new characters. Now, in regards to our main characters, Simon, he is a character that is quite annoying in the first book, and he is still a bit annoying in the second book. However, I can truly appreciate how the author wrote Simon and his coming of age story. I think this book was a perfect encapsulation of what it is a coming of age story, because we see Simon going through his teenage period and who he wants to be and who he thinks he should be. All of those questions are done very well for his development in this book. I think this would probably be one of the best books, I would say, for that type of trope, which I was surprised I was not expecting. And then we have other characters like the princess, whose name I cannot remember. I think she's annoying as well. However, I think her annoyance is done well and is done on purpose so that I don't feel that she's as annoying as Simon, for example. I think she's written quite well, and I like to see, I think she was probably my favorite character to follow in this book. And especially because Prince Joshua wasn't that interesting to me. I thought he was a tiny bit two-dimensional. There wasn't much going around except with the characters around him. I think, in my view, the characters around Prince Joshua were more interesting than himself. So we had that issue. But aside from that, I think the characters overall were improved in comparison with the first book, and I also thought that the side characters were as well, because that was one of my issues. The side characters seemed to be a bit two-dimensional, and I think this time they weren't just prototypes or just reflections of a single stereotype. They had more facets to them, which I enjoyed. And because of that, I think I'm going to give this category a 4 out of 5. What about world building? Well, this book was pretty good in terms of world building. It feels expansive. The world feels really big, which is good. And because the characters are always traveling, we do get that exploration sense and we do get to see many different places. And on top of that, I think the author is quite good at describing epic scale things. So in this case, Stone of Farewell, which is towards the end of the book, I think it definitely gave that very epic scale, that awe and fantastical feeling, which is something we want to feel, right? That's why we're reading fantasy. And I think that plus the different aspects of the peoples, especially Simon's storyline towards the end, it becomes quite fantastical and quite interesting because of the world itself. But I mean, I also had several illustrations in this book which enhanced my experience. You can see by this cover that the Stone of Farewell looks epic just because of the illustration. So if you have this, I'm sure that your experience of reading it will be enhanced because of it. But aside from that, I still think that the writing, which is the part that we're evaluating, is good in itself. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. I forgot to say that regarding the magic systems, this story has a very soft magic system. Think Lord of the Rings like Gandalf, Saruman, where there's a lot of hand waving and magic happens. But aside from that, you know that that's probably not my favorite type of magic system if you've seen my video on world building. But I think that for what it was done well, and it didn't break any coherence in the book itself. So because of all this, 4 out of 5. And we're finally moving into the writing style category. And what do I have to say about the writing style? Well, prose-wise, I think the prose is good. It has good descriptions. I think it's never too descriptive or not descriptive enough. I think it sits right at that sweet spot that I enjoy. And this is a very personal, subjective thing. So you might not enjoy the level of descriptions that he does. I do. However, what I have a gripe is the pacing, because I feel like this book is so slow. and it takes ages for anything to happen, and the characters are just walking. And okay that there's action, but it definitely doesn't feel like the action is moving the plot forward. It's just, oh, we're being chased, oh, we're having a battle, and nothing much happens to the characters themselves or to the plot to keep things going. So I felt that the pacing was very, very slow. And again, this is partially a reflection of the time it was written, but yeah, that time they really like to elongate those explorations in traveling because the journey is what matters, not the destination. So there is that issue. But one of the things that I want to talk about in this category is that I can totally see how this book is the next step from Lord of the Rings. And I don't mean this as in Lord of the Rings is bad or worse. I mean this as in an evolution type of perspective. So think about evolution of species or Pokemon if you're into it. Just think Lord of the Rings as the primary form of fantasy. And then this book, this series is kind of like the next evolution of epic fantasy. And for example, after this, the third evolution would be Wheel of Time. And after Wheel of Time, it would be The Shadow of What Was Lost. Like that. And so it just keeps evolving through time until we have the present form, which is the fantasy that you see all around. So I can totally see this as being a middle piece that is essential for fantasy to keep evolving. However, I'm not sure if this series is going to be strong enough to withstand the times passing. And I think Lord of the Rings, for being the first, and a lot of other fantasy in the middle that are quite strong, will remain. And this might fade a bit into the void, but I hope it still remains for a long time because I do think that it has a lot of good qualities in the writing and in the story itself. I mean, it's quite different in some aspects, even though it copies a lot of tropes in fantasy. I think there is some originality to it. But so for this category, I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5 because that pacing really killed me, and I really hope that the third and last book improves on that. And finally, our last category is enjoyment. Now, my first read of the first book was a bit of a disaster. I was dreading reading that book, and every time I picked it up, it was big, and I was like, oh, I really don't want to read this, but I have to push through. That because of this, when I started this book, I was like, oh god, let's see what's happening with this. Let's hope it improves, especially because some of you have commented on the video for the first book that it does get better and the writing improves and it becomes more engaging. So that allowed me to finally gather the courage and start reading this. And I think my enjoyment was much better throughout the book. It wasn't amazing. I wasn't looking to read this book, but I also wasn't dreading it. It was like, oh, okay, let's go read it. It's a big one. We just have to push through and it will get better eventually. And yeah, there were parts that were very slow, but towards the end, I gotta admit, it was cool. It was fun to read. And I think overall, it did a pretty good job. Did I love this book? Definitely not, but I also think it wasn't that bad as the first book. So overall, for this category, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. And that leads us to the end of our review. Just as a refresher, we have 3 for plot, 4 for characters, 4 for world building, 3 for writing style, and 3 for enjoyment, which gives us a final score of 3.4 out of 5. Now, it's not a great score. It's quite low in terms of all the books that I review, and even comparing with the Goodreads score, which is a 4.1 out of 5. That doesn't mean it's a bad book. It's still on the positive. And if we look, for example, to the score of my the first book, then it is an improvement. The first book was worse than the second one, which means that as well that we don't have really the middle book syndrome. So that is good. We've seen an improvement. And I just hope that reading the third one, it just keeps improving, especially because the third one is like 2 huge tomes that I have to read. So I hope it gets better. Otherwise, it will be pure torture to read those books. But then again, I think this book is an acquired taste. It's like not everyone likes olives, but some people just by eating it a few times will enjoy it. And I think this book and this series is kind of like that. It's epic fantasy, but it's an olden style epic fantasy. Not everyone will like it, and that's okay. Some people really love epic fantasy, the olden epic fantasy, so they will love this. And some others, maybe by drinking it or eating it or reading it slowly, they will be able to enjoy it eventually. And I think this series is that case. But anyways, I want to know what you think. Have you read this book? If you have, please comment down below why other people should read it. Because I'm not sure if I did a great job at convincing them, but I know that there's always people that are trying to convince others to read their favorite books. And if that's your case, comment down below. Otherwise, if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content. You'll be seeing me on Thursdays and Sundays, okay? See you soon, but let me just say that the video where I will do a tour of all these bookshelves is coming next week, hopefully, if I can edit it all on time. And yeah, be curious to see that. So see you soon.